Good morning, colleagues. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome to this meeting of the Governance Committee, our first meeting of 2026. This meeting is open to the public and will be webcast as ever, and the recording will be available on the website for people to view later. It's also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. The agenda and reports for today's meeting are available on the Council website and via the modern.gov app, and paper copies are also available in the room if anyone needs any. Please can I request that mobile phones are put on silent mode so that we don't disturb the meeting, and I'm pleased to report there's no fire test planned for today, so if there is an emergency, please follow the instructions from the Town Hall staff. My name is Councillor Dodd. I'm the chair of this committee. I'd like to invite all other members and officers present to introduce themselves. Shall we start with members?
Councillor Mary Lee, Darnell Ward.
Councillor Rob Bannister, Grace Park Ward.
Councillor Minesh Parrott, Crooks and Crosspools, subbing in for Councillor Fran Belbin.
Councillor Brian Holmshaw, Bromhill and Sheriff Vale, subbing for Paul Turpin.
Councillor Diane Hurst, member for Richmond Ward.
Councillor for Jowerton, Dawn Totley Ward.
Councillor Mike Lee, member for West Ecclesfield.
Councillor Sue Alston from Fulwood and Deputy Chair of this committee.
Thank you, colleagues. If I can ask officers to do the same. Start with David.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Jason Deeds, Head of Democratic Services.
Sarah Hyde, Democratic Services.
Great, thank you all. And as we heard, we've had apologies for absence from Councillor Fran Belbin and Councillor Paul Turpin. There are no items to exclude the press and public from today, so that brings us to declarations of interest. Do any members present have any declarations they wish to declare that are relevant to today's agenda? Seeing none, I'll turn us to item 5, the minutes of the previous meeting. Can members approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of November last year? Seeing nods, thank you all. We've received no petitions, questions or statements from members of the public for today's meeting. So that brings us to the substantive items for our meeting today. And we're starting with the review of public questions and petitions that Jason will speak to us about. Colleagues will recall that about 2 years ago we did a piece of work reviewing this system and put in place a number of changes. This report brings to our attention the review of those changes and recommends a number of things to further strengthen the public questions, statements and petition scheme, which Jason will tell us more about.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. This report outlines changes to the scheme, proposals on the way that people can ask public questions. We reviewed the changes introduced in 2024 and we asked members of the public, elected members and officers for their views. So the proposals within the paper seek to address a lot of the issues that were raised during the surveys. And I'd like to just thank everybody who participated in the surveys because they've been really useful insight for the working group of this committee, which looked at the proposals for change. Just to outline some of the issues identified and the things we aim to address. It was seen as quite a complicated process with several categories of question and different deadlines, which made the experience for members of the public sometimes quite complicated and difficult to explain the process in a concise way for us. We wanted to maintain improvements in the quality of responses, which we think had been achievements of the last sets of changes that we've made, and not to reduce the time available to officers in the council and committee chairs in providing those quality responses. We certainly wanted to continue with improvements that we've made for people to access meetings, whether that be online or asking people to ask questions on their behalf if they couldn't attend the committee. So we certainly didn't want for those things to disappear. But we also wanted to consider the capacity of the organisation to operate this process and ways in which we could demonstrate feedback from the issues that people have raised with us. So they were the aims that we had in mind when we're looking at the review. Section 2 of the report really goes into the detail of what the process would look like in respect of full council and in respect of committees. So I won't go through the absolute detail of that, but that's set out in the tables there. The aim would be to make changes to the scheme of public involvement and explain the changes within those tables in a more full way in the actual scheme itself. Important reflections really for us were from the surveys, and the working group took some time to look at the views expressed in the surveys about awareness of opportunities to participate, how easy or difficulty the experience was for them, and in relation to accessibility. So section 4 of the report details the feedback and the comments that were made as part of the surveys, the 3 surveys that we did in there. And really customer experience was something that came across that we wanted to improve, and there is a section later on in the report which outlines a plan by which we will seek to improve customer experience. So that will include a review of the website information and communication materials that are available, redesigning the digital forms that we use, make sure we test the process and the information with members of the public before we actually launch it, to make sure it works, make sure it's intuitive and easily explained, and then consider how far and explore how far we can integrate the process of questions and statements with the wider customer experience work, including the council's customer relationship management model, and any other integration and improvements that are on the website, like the chatbot and things like that. And then finally, we'll build in a process of review in 12 months' time. But if we think that something needs changing before that, there's an ability for us to review the scheme before that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, really helpful. Colleagues, any comments or questions on this paper? Councillor Otten and then Councillor Olsen.
Thank you. Yes, I'm just looking at on page 16 the proposal regarding full council, and I'm a little bit unclear, I suppose, because it talks about follow-up questions. It talks about people asking their original question, which is something we don't have at the moment. If somebody has they get to ask a supplementary and they get a written answer. So the proposal is that people get to ask verbally their original question, to which everybody knows the answer, and potentially a follow-up. So that's 2 questions, effectively, for a single member of the public with a single question, a full council. And I'm just a little bit, because we have in principle anyway, we have an hour's time limit. It seems a bit odd to say that this member of the public can ask 2 questions and then it's going to run out of time and then other member of the public doesn't get to ask any. Is that the intention, or what exactly is the intention here?
Jason, do you want to respond?
Thanks. Yeah, I think the intention was to simplify the process so we didn't have 2 types of questions. So in doing that, we brought in the original question to the scenario of a meeting, so a council meeting or policy committee meeting, with a potential for people to ask a follow-up, which is what we called a supplementary before. We call them follow-up questions now. So I think our expectation was that people would come and ask their original question, or ask a question that was in the bounds of their original question, or that would be asked on their behalf.
Thanks, Jason. I think David also wants to come in. Perhaps, David, you could also clarify the situation currently and the situation as it will change, so that we can just be clear about what's changed and what's stayed the same.
So the current situation is that people if they want to ask a question, they put it in advance. It is answered in writing, which is published on the website, but they don't get to repeat that question in the chamber, and the answer isn't given in the chamber. It remains online, so unless somebody's read it, then they don't know what it is. We then have the supplementary questions presently that are then asked. What we tend to get is people, because there's been nothing in the chamber around what the original question was, reference their original question in relation to the supplementary. So we've sort of got not the full original and the answer, but an element of, well, this is what the original was and this is my supplementary at the moment. It may be that people don't want to ask supplementaries or follow-ups, and at the moment there is nothing in the chamber on the day that recognises that their question has been asked. So what we wanted to do was move back to a situation where if somebody just has a question that they want to ask, then it is answered in the chamber, asked and answered in the chamber on the day. What we will do is give them the answer in writing shortly before the meeting, and that will be published, but it's not published days in advance as it currently is now. So it then just allows a short follow-up question to that. So it's not now two separate processes, it's one process, but with the ability just to follow up.
Thank you. So if I can summarise what I think I've heard in response to that question, members of the public are still going to have the opportunity to ask the same sort of total volume of questions that they currently ask, but we're going to give greater emphasis to their primary question that will be heard and aired in the council chamber itself, and the follow-up question can then respond directly to the answer that they've received, and they'll receive an answer kind of off the cuff in the room to that response. Does that provide you with the assurance?
Well, not really. I mean, Chair, if I may. So, because we are now effectively reintroducing the original question, which it does make, I can see the logic of doing that, because as it stands, we have supplementaries without any context, and it's a little bit baffling to members who aren't, up to speed with it, and members of the public. But there's a scenario, isn't there, as I said in my question, where there's an hour, there isn't time for all the questions. The first 15 people get to ask their question and their supplementary, and the next 15 people don't get anything. Is that really what we intend to do? Is there not some? I mean, I appreciate that the hour is often extended, but I don't think we can. I don't think we should write rules in the anticipation that the time limit will always be extended and that there will always be sufficient time to extend it. So are we really saying that, that 15 people get to ask 2 questions and another 15 don't get to ask any? Because that does seem to be the danger with the specific proposal we have here.
Thanks, Councillor Otten. I mean, ultimately, when we put a time limit on anything, we're saying there is a finite amount of time available for this activity, and therefore some people will get to participate in the activity and others won't, but I appreciate what you're saying. I think we have discussed these items, in fact all of the recommendations, in quite some length in the working group, which all councillors have been a member of, and we've had quite kind of constructive and positive discussions at that point. So I'm keen that we give space in this forum also to all of the many things that people might want to raise, but if officers wanted to come in on Councillor Otten's point in particular, otherwise I'm going to move on to other questions.
Councillor Otten is correct in how he described how it may play out, and these things are always a balance between what may be competing interests of, is it better for everybody to be able to ask their question in the chamber and have it acknowledged in the chamber? Is it better for people to have the ability to have a follow-up question, or rather not have anything? Councillor Otten's right that we quite often extend the time. It won't always be the case that there will be so many questions that we can't get through all of this, but there may be occasions when that is the case, and members may feel it's appropriate, depending upon how many questions are outstanding and the nature of them, to extend the time allowed for questions, but there is no guarantee of that. But all of these things are a balance between what the best thing to do is.
Thanks, and I just wanted to recall that everyone will receive a written answer to their question also, so there will still be an opportunity. No one will be unanswered in their questions. Great, I'm going to move us on from that round of discussion. Were there comments from other colleagues? Councillor Austin.
Thank you. Yeah, on that, starting on that comment, I thought we'd put a limit of 1 minute on the follow-up. Is that right, to try and stop all the repetition? Yeah, I mean, firstly, I just want to say thanks to everybody that's been involved with this. As with any changes, there is always a risk of making things worse rather than better. But I think when we made the first set of changes, we did improve quite a lot of aspects of public questions. And I think we picked up that the principal problem was that it was really quite a complex system. And I think we have here simplified it, and time will tell if we have been successful. My only sort of concern and something that I just wanted to bring out in this meeting is that we are making more changes, presumably once this is agreed, assuming this is agreed by council, then I know there's a plan to simplify and improve the public-facing part of our website with the explanations and things, and I really would like to encourage whoever's responsible to make sure that happens as soon as it practicably can, because I do think that is really important. And I also think we should maybe look at whether we, once the changes are agreed, if they are, that we try and let people know that there's been a change and sort of give some consideration to how we can make sure people are aware that we've changed our processes. Other than that, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I echo that also. Officers, I wondered if you'd be able to tell us a bit about what the forward plan is for notifying people of the changes and kind of sharing the information, should we approve this paper?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the platform we use for the consultation members of the public is Have Your Say, which is the council's consultation platform. And as part of that, whilst we can't contact individuals, there's an ability for us to notify people of what we've done as a result. And there's also a newsletter to the people that subscribe to that part of the consultation side of the council's website. So we'll notify people through that route. I think it's also important to point out we want to test this with a group of people to make sure what we're saying actually works in practice, because obviously we've worked through it as a working group and just making sure the communications are really clear. We think we've simplified it, but actually the test is really whether people actually feel that way. And so we'll be working with our communications team as well on communicating the changes, as well as the customer experience team, to make sure we get that right. Once you've written it down, sometimes in full it looks different to how you might have imagined it in the first place. So yeah, I think it's really important we do those things and keep that review in mind, that we might need to tweak those things as they go along.
Thanks. And I'm going to come to Councillor Holmshaw in a second. Can I request, there are a number of people who regularly ask questions at full council who obviously will be familiar with the current scheme. Is there a way that we can write out to, say, anyone who's asked a question in the last 3 full council meetings to let them know that the scheme has changed and that therefore they should expect it to work differently in the future, so that nobody is caught unawares? It would be unfortunate for people to be unable to participate due to our efforts to make it easier for them to participate. I can see nods from General Counsel, so that would be great. Thank you. Councillor Holmshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask about, on page 17, questions and statements at committees. So this is committee engagement and questions. And forgive me because I haven't been part of the group before, so probably been dealt with in great depth. But I wanted to ask why it isn't quite, well, it maybe you're attempting to standardise between the two elements of full council and committees in terms of questions and people asking their question and it being submitted, and then they're able to verbally say it in the meeting, and then there's a supplementary. So I think it's important that these are standardised between the two committees. So if that's the direction of travel that we're attempting to go, I think that's a good one. But what I see, and which I think we all see at full council, is there are very often, not always, but very often, and coming up to elections, it may increase, is there are too many questions being asked at full council. And what I would like to push for is that there are some more active delegation to committees of those questions where they are relevant to a particular committee. So that's what I was going to ask him. That's considered. Maybe pros and cons to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason, I don't know if you are able to respond to that. It makes me think about the conversation we were having in the working group about the kind of front end of this system, where we're going to try and make it much easier for people to not need to understand the back end, as it were, and for their question to be asked at the next available opportunity, should they want that, rather than it kind of defaulting to feeling like full council's the only place it could be asked. So maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. with the working group, did look at whether there was ability to direct people to the right place for their question, and that might be a policy committee rather than full council. At the same time, there's a balance, because we know that some people do wish to come to full council, and that's the place they want to come. So it's really, if we can improve the form and the front end as people do that, and the advice to say, well, actually, this question might be asked in this place, and that might be the appropriate place for you. And it might well be that it's asked at a local area committee or something, rather than one of the committees that are held in the town hall instead. So we certainly looked at that as a working group, but we also know that people sometimes like to take their question to a particular place as well. So it's a balance between the two, really.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just follow up. I think because committees are the active decision-making bodies for many subjects, I think it's appropriate that people are directed where possible. That's what I do. I will direct people to the particular committee that it's relevant to. People don't always take up the opportunity, but I think it's key that we do that to spread the load and take the pressure off full council and its question-making system, which can be very fraught.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you. I think questions have become more complex and technical over the last couple of years. Obviously, people do a lot of homework, and there's sometimes groups come to ask similar questions, but not the same question. And I just wondered how much office, you might not be able to tell me exactly how much time, but is there a lot of officer time that goes into answering these very technical questions? And I think if there is, I think we should acknowledge that, so that people understand what is involved behind the scenes.
Thanks. Yeah, I think one of the things we were reflecting on was the effort that it takes in the organisation to respond to particularly detailed questions, and particularly when they come in high volume. I think that's one of the things we wanted to address in this, to make sure there's still enough time, hence moving to sort of one deadline that's got enough time for officers and chairs to prepare the responses to the questions, and actually provide a good service to members of the public who have taken the trouble to ask a question, to making sure they get a good, detailed answer and a good answer, and if necessary, a follow-up question may also result in some further work. So really, it's a commitment to continue with that quality work. But one of the things that came back from the officer survey certainly was about the sort of burden of work that's involved here, recognising the importance of it, but actually saying it is an issue that we need to try and tackle, hence trying to make the process a little more simple, with less stages and perhaps less work before the committee meeting or the council meeting itself. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions anyone wants to raise? Councillor Levery.
Thanks, Chair. Implementation, Jason, 229. There's quite a lot to do and not a lot of time if we're going to implement it from the municipal year 26-27. You're intending to produce an action plan. Are you going to put some deadlines on that to achieve the goal? That's the first question. And secondly, when it comes to testing the process and customers, we talked about alerting people who've asked questions in the last few months. But I think the most important test is people who've never actually done it, who come for the first time onto the website and they navigate their way through to understanding what the question is. And I think there needs to be a selection of people like that who try it out, because most of the complaints I've always had have been, we don't know how to do this, or what does this mean? So I think the test there is crucial, but I think also the implementation plan. If you could give us some more details, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So in terms of the plan for the customer experience side and the work obviously to do to get this prepared for the municipal year, yeah, we'll have an action plan with dates on it so we can work to them, because obviously there's quite a lot of things to do in that. In terms of testing with a group of people that never used the system before, it's interesting that the majority of responses we got from the public survey were from people who had never used the public questions process before, and they still had comments to make around what we could do, what might make it easier to know about these things. So the customer experience group that we would work with the customer experience team, that would include people who probably have never used this process before, and probably many of them would never have used it before. So it's really testing the language and how easy is this form to use? Does it actually tell you what you need to know? And is there a bigger piece of work to do in explaining what our committee system is? Because the point about how do I know the right committee to go to and things like that is kind of helping people understand how our system works, who does what, and where the decisions are made. So that's probably the other side of this, as well as the actual public questions process itself. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Councillor Upton.
Thank you. It's just an observation. Despite my other comments, I'm happy to support this today. I apologise for not raising some of these issues sooner. And as it is, it's certainly in the spirit of trying it out. Maybe the issues I've raised won't happen, but the observation is that obviously we have a full council review on our work programme coming up, and part of the issue around full council is the timings. It's a 3.5-hour meeting. If you take out the comfort break, it's 3 hours and 10 minutes. An hour of that is public questions, actually more than an hour. We're talking about currently, on a popular meeting, a third of it being public questions. Now, potentially, we've extended that by saying there's going to be more public questions. People are going to have 2 questions. So maybe we have decided already that half the meeting, rather than a third of the meeting, will be public questions. Now, maybe that's right. It's an important part of the meeting. But we've kind of stolen a march slightly on the full council review that was meant to be looking at all the functions of full council in the round. So I hope that we haven't already kind of settled some of the considerations we're going to be having under that, and that we can look at the timings, the different demands on full council properly in the round when we come to that, and we haven't sort of created a constraint on ourselves that we might come to regret.
Thanks, Councillor Upton. I think we've taken one bite of what is quite a large cake through doing this bit of work, and as you say, there are many interrelated factors when we think about full council as a whole, and indeed we've pulled back some of the available time in this section, particularly by limiting the length of councillors' answers, particularly on petitions, which was at 5 minutes, and I think we're now saying is at 3 minutes, so that we're giving more time, as it were, to the members of the public to ask their questions rather than to the politicians to provide lengthy answers. So I'm hopeful, at least, that we will find a way to give appropriate time to this section in its entirety, the statements, the questions and the petitions. But as you say, we may need to review and reflect on the amount of time allocated to different parts of the meeting as we think about full council as a whole. I don't know if officers want to comment on the kind of full council aspects of this, or if we're...
I suppose what we're doing is we're assuming that we have the current arrangements for full council. This is improving what we've currently got. If we need to revise this again through that full council work, we can do. I don't think this sets a precedent that says, now we've done this, we can't re-look at how we do public questions as part of the look at full council, is what I'd say.
Great, thank you. Councillor Park.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got a quick question about the process outlined on page 16 and 17. So written questions committees and written questions full council, both of them say for follow-up questions, the committee chair will invite the question to ask a follow-up question. I understand that for committees. I wonder if for full council that should be the Lord Mayor, or if the Lord Mayor is being used as committee chair in this context, which might be confusing because committee chair is used in a different context in the same process. I'm not sure if I've understood it, misunderstood it.
Yeah, Jason, do you want to provide clarity?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so where it says full council, it should say Lord Mayor as the chair. Yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any other colleagues indicate that they want to ask questions. So are we content to approve the recommendations in this paper that we make, that we're approving the recommendations for the changes to the Council's process for public questions, statements and petitions, and that we request the General Counsel to revise the scheme that guides this work, produce and implement an action plan, as was just discussed, to improve the customer experience, and to report back to Governance Committee on the effectiveness of the new arrangements within 12 months or earlier, if possible. Seeing nods around the table, thank you, colleagues. That's approved. Item 8 is the Charity Trustee Conflicts of Interest Policy. I believe, David, you're presenting on
Rob,
this one. Fantastic.
I will
Rob, if you could introduce yourself as you arrive, that would be great. While you're getting yourself set up, just on that previous agenda item, I wanted to echo the comments that were made by several colleagues of sharing this committee's thanks to the members of public councillors and officers who contributed to the input of that work. It's remiss of me not to say that in the earlier agenda item. We had quite a lot of contributions from members of the public, probably more than we were expecting, and we're really grateful for the level of detail and thought that went into that. And I understand that officers are using the Have Your Say system, as was referenced earlier, to make sure that everybody who input into our work hears how their input has shaped the conclusions that we've come to. So thanks to everyone who was involved in that, including the many discussions we had within the working group of this committee, which were constructive and positive, and I think a good example of cross-party working. So thank you to all involved. On to agenda item 8. Rob, if you can introduce yourself.
Good morning, committee members, members of the public. I'm Robert Parkin, one of the assistant directors within the legal services team. So I'm going to present this report to you today. Shall I just proceed? Okay, thank you. So this report has the purpose of presenting the Charity Trustee Conflicts of Interests policy to you for seeking that you approve it for recommendation to full council to be adopted into the Constitution, and to note that it will be reviewed on a noted a conflict in the report itself. The report itself mentions biannual. The actual policy says twice a year, so biennial. I think it's probably meant to be biennial, so twice a year. Purpose and rationale. Well, the council acts as a charity trustee in a number of in relation to a number of charities, and charity law is hard-edged. Whenever a trustee, whatever they are, whatever they're constituted as, whether a company, an individual, or a corporate entity by statute, such as a council, they've got to act for the purposes of the charity. This policy is aimed at articulating how the council goes about identifying, dealing with, responding to, and ideally avoiding the manifestation or the materialisation of conflicts arising. It's not mandatory, but it's recommended practice by the Charity Commission that councils and organisations adopt these policies. Context. So the council is a complex organisation with a number of freestanding duties and functions. The way that it manages potential conflicts is through a host of different legislative provisions, which essentially require focus on specific purpose. That's around the public law principle of proper purpose. Reports are drawn, and they professionally draw the decision maker, whether it's the officer or a committee, or full council indeed, or an individual member in some contexts, toward the specific purposes. So these features and these themes are of course consistent and common to local authorities and Sheffield City Council. The council distributes its function of trustee into very specifically the charity trustee subcommittee. It's quite a comprehensive reservation to the committee. It's essentially anything material around a charity, and that includes even things that are just a bit beyond administration, must go to the committee. So first of all, everything is placed in an environment where the role of the trustee is separated off from other activities and decisions and functions of the council. Other points that are relevant is that around decision making, of course, and around the preparation of reports, for example, professional duties of officers and the role of members in terms of those proper purposes are set out and prescribed in the Constitution. So in of course, the codes of conduct for officers and members. The member officer protocol makes it clear that officers' role is to draw professional direction and expertise around specific decisions and to act independently around those purposes. So there's a number of layers. As well, in the context of charities specifically, the legislation requires that where a decision is made by an entity and it could benefit or affect a connected person, then it must be presented to the Charity Commission for onward approval. So whilst the general law might not require a charitable trustee to send decisions such as the giving of licences up to the Charity Commission, where a party that is essentially taking that licence is connected, i.e. the council potentially taking a licence over land which is subject to a charitable trust, it must present that to the Charity Commission. That offers an additional level of scrutiny and an obligation to demonstrate that separation. The conflicts of interest policy, just a really quick fly through. It looks to identify conflicts, so where they may arise, where there may be a direct benefit, i.e. in this instance that the council might benefit from utilising charitable assets, or perhaps where a duty of loyalty exists to a third party. It requires this policy to draw that out and explain it. It notes that perceived conflicts are extremely important and should be treated as serious as actual conflicts. So must be explained and described and avoided where possible. The conflicts of interest policy echoes our other obligations under the general law to do with recording decisions, to do with declaring interests where they exist, and generally to avoid and mitigate conflicts before they materialise. Thank you, David.
Yes. Come on.
Yes, excuse me. Yeah, so there we go. Governance expectations, there be a training requirement for officers and members involved around charity activity, with that monitoring and review activity as well on an annual basis. Those are the principal points in the report and the conflicts of interest policy. We're happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for your work developing this paper. Do I see any comments or questions from colleagues around the table? Councillor Holshaw.
Yeah, thank you. As I said, I've not been on the committee before, so I'm late into this. What I was going to ask was, is there a 7.1 or wherever which covers those grey areas which may or may not be conflicts of interest, and how is that resolved and by whom?
So, grey areas in grey areas in relation to the possibility of a conflict. So I think there's a number of.
To give an example, if this is raised by a member of the public, and there is potential conflict of interest here, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, so I think there's a sort of cumulative response, essentially, to the challenge of that possibility. Firstly, broad understanding, professionalism, so training of those involved around charities to be aware of the possibility of those conflicts and to manage them before they materialise. I'm going to say that word. But also to listen and respond to questions coming in. I think some of the charities clearly are high profile in the city, and we have people that are interested in how the trust assets, for example, are managed and what happens with them. So it's a relatively, it can be quite highly developed, that understanding of where conflict exists. And I think it is a case of listening, understanding, responding and articulating it, and being clear in reports where it might exist, and working with the Charity Commission. Since I've been with the authority, there's been a developing relationship there through correspondence and in particular matters. regularising activity to their satisfaction. So I think it's a cumulative response, but it's definitely listening, it's definitely being open to the possibility and being proactive in looking to manage that.
Thank you, that's helpful. Councillor Otten.
Thank you. Apologies if this question is slightly adjacent to the question in front of us, but the committee is currently written as a subcommittee of S&R, though it's not a true subcommittee in the sense that people not on S&R do get appointed to it. I wonder if because members of S&R and, in fact, members of all policy committees are perhaps closer to the wider interests of the council in their other roles, that we'd be in a stronger position with regard to conflicts of interest if we didn't appoint members of policy committees to the charity committee. Is that, is that a reasonable concern, or is that, am I missing the point?
Councillor Otten, slightly jumping ahead to the next agenda item and what might come out of the next agenda item. I think all members are either on a policy committee or a regulatory committee, and that might include these. I think I wouldn't want to say that we have to carve out members who, if they're on the charity trustee subcommittee, can't sit on any other committees. Not least because of the workload that might have for everybody else on covering the other committees. Members are well used to wearing a number of different hats when they are in different committees. So knowledge of something and knowledge of other interests is something that both officers and members are used to dealing with throughout all of the things that they do. It's about making sure that when they're in one particular role, that they are focused on that, and also that the advice and the reports before them are focused on that as well.
Thank you. Councillor Bannister.
Yeah, so I do think it's a good piece of work, and I think hopefully it'll start bringing us back to where we need to be. There's in my world, Grace Park, obviously biggest park in the city, massive breakdown in trust between ourselves and the friends groups because there was a huge perception of bias, that the council was simply taking what they wanted and doing what they wanted. So, yeah, in kind of working through this, I think the critical bit is we get it down to the sort of grassroots so that people aren't deciding, oh, there's a space there, I'll simply just use it. Now, I know we don't want to be micromanaging down to sort of like the blade of grass, but with the kind of larger areas that get repurposed for either parks or potentially some other use, potentially a commercial use, we just need to be really careful that it's going back through the committee. And all right, that might create work for them, but if we're going to rebuild that trust between ourselves as the people who have that conflict of interest, because we clearly do being both sides of the argument, we're going to just need to be very open and make sure we keep people involved with it. Sorry, more of a statement than a question.
Thank you. Officers, does anyone want to respond to the statement?
I think it's a really important point that clearly as I said, the assets are in many cases high profile, very important parts. They've been dedicated for the purpose of the objects, which are essentially public facing. So absolutely, those that are interested parties in them are a key part of that dialogue and also part of, I think, getting this right. So that's been my experience, is the desire to hear and listen and develop that understanding over time.
Great, thank you. Any further questions or comments from colleagues? In that case, I think we'll draw this to a conclusion. Thank you very much for the work that you've put into this. I think things like this can often feel quite technical, but as Councillor Bannister's comments highlight, there are some serious real-world consequences of what happens when we get this right, or more particularly when we don't quite get it right. So it's great to see that we'll have a clear way of managing this in the future that ensures that we've got a kind of lawful framework for identifying, managing and recording our conflicts of interests when the council is acting in multiple different capacities, and particularly with regard to the charitable status of some of the things that we manage. So colleagues, are we happy to approve this paper and its recommendations, which are to approve the conflict of interest policy, recommend that full council that the policy be incorporated in the council constitution, and note that the review arrangements, which I think you've confirmed are every 2 years, and perhaps we could minute that that's the understanding. Is that correct, David? That's what it says in the policy itself, is that we will review it every 2 years. With delegated authority to the monitoring officer to make amendments where necessary or based on guidance.
Could you just clarify, where would this go for ratification now?
To full council.
Thank you.
That's the recommendation, is that we are recommending to full council that they approve this and incorporate it into the constitution. Are colleagues in agreement? Great, thank you very much, and thanks again to officers for their work on this. David, I think you can stay up at the front for item 9, which is, as Councillor Otten alluded to earlier, the terms of reference for the working group on how we will manage the council's role as a charity trustee, in addition to this one piece of work around conflicts of interest. So David, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and can I apologise to all members and members of the public for the late publication of this report. I don't want to hopefully repeat too much of what's already been said, but this does link very closely with the previous item. So, I mean, the role of trustee is an important one that the council exercises. It does not derive from its statutory functions, but predominantly comes to the council through gifts of land. In a lot of cases, there's a parks or green spaces, and those are the ones that are well known, but that's not exclusively so. And most of the arrangements where the council is trustee are historic. In those cases, the council always operates independently of the other council's functions and acts in the interest of the charity and its beneficiaries. And as Robert outlined earlier, it needs to follow charity law and also charity commission guidance. We know, and Councillor Bannister has already alluded to some of those, that across local authorities and also here, that distinction may not always have been recognised. I do think that here in Sheffield, we have made great steps in how we understand the role of charity trustee, and in particularly over recent times. But the Charity Commission has written to all local authorities to remind them of the separation, and is actually making formal investigations into some local authorities. So it's important that we don't get complacent in this, and that we continue to look at how we set up the role of trustee within our system, and how it's best placed to serve that role of trustee and allow the council to do so lawfully and in line with the guidance and best practice. So I want to make an important distinction here, that it's not for governance committee to tell the council how it makes the decisions as trustee. That is always going to be a matter for the charity trustee subcommittee. But what we can do is make sure that the way that the constitution sets up that charity trustee subcommittee, and that the systems and operations around it, such as a conflicts of interest policy, are best placed for the charity trustee committee to be able to operate that function. So we've been operating a committee system since 2022, with the subcommittee taking on that role. Previously it was the council's cabinet. So the recommendation is that we now review how that is working and consider if there can be any recommendations for the structure and processes around that committee. Members of that charity trustee subcommittee have got valuable experience from operating that trustee role. So it's suggested that before this committee make any formal recommendations around changes that we might want to the constitution or those working practices, that we form a working group that covers both members of this committee and the charity trustee subcommittee to report back here at a future date, and so that they can consider those matters. Terms of reference are within the report, and they have been formulated with discussion with leads in that subcommittee. And the ask here is to approve the setting up of the working group and those terms of reference. So I want to thank the lead members of that committee, but also officers from Parks and Countryside who were involved in the meeting that led to the formulation of these terms of reference. So Appendix 1 sets out those terms of reference, sets some formal things about how membership shall be determined, also that the working group can co-opt other members either generally or to consider specific points within the terms of reference, and that, if the working group sees fit, might include those from stakeholders who are outside the council. So it does allow the working group to do that. The terms of reference then set out the 6 areas. There is a little bit of overlap with them to consider. So partly to deal with what Councillor Otten has already raised, to consider whether the status of the decision-making committee should remain as a subcommittee of strategy and resources. There is an option to make it a committee in its own right. That is something that can be looked at. A general look at the Charity Commission guidance to trustees. There's quite a lot of guidance, some of it more focused around the role of the trustee and some of it more relevant to local authority, so they can have a review of the relevant pieces of Charity Commission guidance and how they impact the council as trustee and what changes we may want to make as a result of those. Picking up on some of the points around conflicts of interest that Councillor Holmeshaw has mentioned when they're raised, how are our reports structured? So that's not just around conflicts of interest, but generally, how's our reports structured to ensure that they are geared towards that role of trustee as opposed to any other of the council's function, and about making sure there's the right capacity and capability to advise the trustee in that role. How the trustee considers its beneficiaries and the public benefit, which are the overarching obligations it needs to consider, along with the charitable objectives, and how the trustee engages other stakeholders and makes sure that it hears differing views. And then finally, to look at whether there's best practice from other authorities that we may want to incorporate. Now, we have a committee system. Most of the authorities operate through a cabinet system, but there may be something around how we operate and other authorities operate that we can incorporate within how we do things. So those are the recommendations and the terms of reference for a working group that we've been asked to set up.
Thank you, David. Very comprehensive. Have any comments or questions from colleagues? Councillor Alston.
Thank you, and thank you for this. And I do think this is actually going to be a really important piece of work, and I'm really glad we've, at least got to this point. As members who've been around a while will know, our group has had long-standing concerns about, in particular, parks, charities and decision-making. I do think that the use of, since the implementation of the committee system, I think the fact that we have a separate committee for this makes it a definite improvement. But there is clearly more to do to make sure that there is confidence by the public in how we make these decisions. So absolutely support the setting up of this working group. I would actively encourage members of that working group to take time to listen to the views of people who've been involved with the various charities as members of the public or as friends groups, because I think their experiences and views need to be listened to. But other than that, apart from saying that I would really appreciate knowing a bit of a timescale and numbers and the practical details for this soon, I think this is a good step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Alston. On your final point, which I share, I was curious, looking ahead to our next agenda item on the work programme, when this working group might conclude its business and such that we can consider its recommendations in our work programme. I don't know if officers have got an estimate, at least, that they might be able to share now for how long this work might take. That would be helpful to understand.
I don't at the moment, Chair. I think what we need to do is get the group constituted early and for it to have a work programme of what it wants to cover and a timescale for that that's realistic, bearing in mind that we're coming up to elections and we might want to try and get it done before we get into that cycle. So I'm hoping that we can very soon set up, get the membership agreed once the terms are are agreed, and then get a work programme for that working group.
Thank you. Questions and comments from colleagues? Councillor Park.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work on this. I just got a short comment on the terms of reference for when they're finalised. I think on point 3, I think there might be a couple of words missing, and I think it should be advised, but I think reports to the potentially committee are might be needed.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Councillor Levery.
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit of clarification, David. You say on page 6 at the top, the need for this work has been informed by feedback from formal and informal channels in relation to that role. So, bearing in mind we started with this in 22, is this more recently that the feedback's been coming through, or has it been consistent throughout? Thank you.
I think there's probably a little bit of both in that. So we know that in some areas there's been challenge around some of the things that weren't right in relation. Graves is one of the things that have been mentioned, but there's also been informal feedback that we've had in relation to through things like public questions around how we operate this role that have gone to the Charity Trustee Subcommittee, but also the work that we've been doing with the Charity Commission itself around some specific elements of decisions that were being taken. All of those have sort of fed into the feeling that we need to do a review.
Thank you. Councillor Holmshaw.
Again, a bit of clarification, please. So you mentioned, I think it was you, David, in the introduction about 2 possible places where the committee would sit, something to do with strategy and resources, but also as a standalone committee, because I've potentially got a question on the back of that.
Yeah, I don't want to do the work of the working group, so I think it's for it to look at that and set it up. So there are, at the moment, the Charity Trustee Subcommittee was formed as a subcommittee of strategy and resources. I think what I'm saying is we can look at that to see whether that remains the right thing. There are a number of options if we want to do something different, but I don't want to guess what the outcome will be from the working group recommendation.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and neither do I want to preempt that either. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, colleagues. I'm not seeing any other indications of comments or questions. I think this is a really welcome report. As others have mentioned, it's an important function that we serve in the city as a trustee of these 41 different charities, and it's important that we get that right, and it's important that we're seen to get that right. So putting in place this working group to improve the way that we do that feels like a timely thing to do. If colleagues are content to approve this paper, I see nodding. It makes recommendations to set up the working group that will report back to this committee in due course, but hopefully we'll be able to be a bit more specific about that timeline once they get underway, and ask them to provide recommendations on how the council operates its role as a charity trustee, and that we agree the membership and terms of reference for the working group as set out in Appendix 1. Seeing nods, thank you, colleagues, for approving that report. Item 10 is our work plan. Jason, do you want to begin the discussion on this item?
Thanks. Just to introduce this paper, it outlines the committee work programme for consideration by the committee. There is a brief summary of the work we've been doing outside the formal meetings of the committee in relation to the work on public questions that we've looked at today, the review of full council has been referenced as well, and then the scheme of delegation. So there has been quite a lot of activity, and the meetings of the working group are listed on the back of the report there. So really for consideration of the items are already on the work programme. There is a long list at the end of some items on there, and I know that in March we probably need to think about whether the item on full council will be in a place to come to the March meeting of the committee. So just for discussion, really. Thanks, Chair.
Great, thank you. Yes, as your paper outlines, we've been busy behind the scenes preparing some of the documents that we've reviewed and approved today, but also thinking ahead to the full council process, and have been in our full council working group hearing from some of the feedback from particularly councillor colleagues about ways that we might improve full council, and are partway through our consideration of that, as was referenced by Councillor Otten earlier. So hopefully that will be ready to bring to a subsequent meeting within this municipal year, so that we can put changes in place for the next. Are there any comments from questions from colleagues? Councillor Alston.
Yeah, just a question. I know we discussed delegations, as it's clearly said, in our first meeting of this municipal year, but it's not repeated anywhere later on, and it doesn't seem to be under the list of things for which the committee has agreed to add to the agenda at a future date. So I just wondered if that's by accident or by design.
Well spotted. David, do you want to comment on that as you're leading the delegation's work?
That's by accident. Yes, it should be there. A date to be confirmed.
Great, thank you. And I know a number of my fellow chairs of committees have been approached and had conversations with David about delegations, so that work is underway, and hopefully we'll report back soon. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Holmshaw.
Yeah, likewise, can I ask about the community strategies follow-up workshop, which we've got in the section that says it's agreed to add to an agenda, but there isn't a space yet. Is that, how far has that progressed? Can it have a date?
Jason or David, I don't know who's best placed to respond to that.
I think that's a matter for when we have probably the workshop after this. We can work out what we do at future workshops and plan it through that. So, because it's not within one of the formal meetings, it's going to be a workshop on it. I think we need to get that planned through the next workshop that we've got immediately after this, and then we can make sure we've got some time for that.
Yes, I would think it's probably after March, since we will be busy with our full council work between now and then, in order to try and get something agreed by that deadline, but subsequent to that we can return to this important topic. Any other comments or questions from colleagues? If not, are we happy to approve the work programme with the addition of the item on delegations to be scheduled? Thanks, colleagues. That's great. That brings us to the end of our agenda. The date of the next meeting is the 5th of March 2026. Thank you all for joining us this morning and for your comments and contributions. Thanks also to officers for their participation today and the work that went into producing these reports. If colleagues of Governance Committee want to stay behind, we're going to have one of our regular workshops to try and advance our agenda ahead of our March meeting, so I will see you there. Thanks very much.